So before I start this power rankings, I want to first apologize to everybody that I forgot to do the power rankings last week. I don't know how in the world I forget about it. I even mentioned it after the review I was going to do the power rankings, but I just never did. So I'm sorry about that, and hopefully I won't make that same mistake. And to kind of make up for it, I'm just going to read the power rankings that I put last week on this envelope. So at 23rd, I had the Quakes, and in 22nd, I had the Whitecaps. 21st, I had DC United. 20th, I have Chicago. In 19th, I have Orlando City. 18, I had the Union. 17, I had TFC. And 16, I had Colorado. 15, I had the Sounders. 14, I had the Dynamo. And 13, I had the Revs. 12, I had the Columbus Crew. 11, I had Sporting KC. 10th, I had Minnesota. 9th, I had the Impact. And 8th, I had RSL. 7th, I had LAFC. 6th, I had FC Dallas. 5th, I had the Galaxy. And 4th, I had the Red Bulls. 3rd, I had the Portland Timbers. 2nd, I had NYCFC. And 1st, I had Atlanta United. So that was the power rankings from last week. And now we're going to get to this week. And there was certainly a lot of headlines this week, and certainly there's going to be some changes that's going to happen, but one thing for sure that did not change from last week's ranking is the last spot, which still belongs to the Quakes, sadly. And if the Quakes does not get a win, they are going to stay in that 23rd position because they currently still have the longest winless run in MLS. And in 22nd, and I think this team currently has the longest losing streak in MLS, and that is Chicago, who is fading fast in these last couple of weeks in the playoff spot after losing another game to TFC. And that was also the same time they lost to TFC the previous week, and they have now lost 6 in a row after that good 5-game unbeaten run. And as I mentioned before, all that good run that they had has just come crashing down on them. And now they are just looking to fade away in this playoff race for these last 2 spots in the Eastern Conference. And in 21st, another team that is kind of fading away. And even though they did have a new manager, things still hasn't really worked out for Orlando City yet. And most of the reason why Orlando City still hasn't really kind of raising up as I expected them with their new manager is that their defense is absolutely hideous. I mean, I know that Orlando has played a little bit better under James O'Connor, but it just feels like the defense is kind of the same. It is kind of the same way of how when Jason Christ was there and how they just keep giving up goals left and right and left and right. And it was the same case again this week against the Galaxy, where they blew the lead 3 times and then end up losing it in the end. And in 20th spot, and this team is been in this position around these area for pretty much majority of the season, and that of course is the Rapids, who lost again on the road. And it looked like they were going to get a draw on the road with a late equalizer, but unfortunately, Tim Howard just had to give up a typical Tim Howard goal of this season. And yeah, the Rapids are kind of like right where the same spot as the Quakes are right now in the Western Conference, which is in the bottom of the barrel, and potentially they are going to be there for the entire season. And in 19th place, this team moved up 3 spots from last week, and that, of course, is DC. So DC, of course, got a win in that game against Colorado. You could say that they kind of got lucky in that one because, the Rapids just basically gift wrapped them the win there. But still, it's a win, and I don't think that this team is going to make the playoffs, if that is going to be the way that they're going to win the game. And keep in mind, even though they have now won 2 games at Audi Field, they play 2 of the worst teams in terms of the road record. Colorado has been incredibly bad on the road this season, as it has been the case for the last couple of seasons, and Vancouver has been bad on the road for majority of the second half of the season. And in 18th place, and speaking of Vancouver, that's where they are. They moved up 4 spots from last week. So the Whitecaps, of course, thanks to, once again, Alphonso Davies carrying them with a win over Minnesota, and I think they're now in 7th place in the standings, and they're still looking outside in. But, you know, if Alphonso Davies is going to give them one last hurrah, maybe he can, of course, carry this team to the playoffs. I mean, the Whitecaps are still kind of a team that is right on the edge of what I think maybe they should be on the playoffs or not, because right now I still think this team is just too much rely on Davies, and when Davies is not really having a game, then this Whitecaps team just is not going to have any kind of impact. But certainly that was just one of those games where Davies just completely turned it on, and they beat Minnesota in that game. And in 17th place, this team dropped 2 spots from last week, and that, of course, is Houston. And, you know, Houston, it's been a bad week for the Dynamos. First, they lost to the Union, and it was a bit of a controversial game for them, with the fact that probably they should not have been gone down to 10 men in that game. And then against the Timbers, once again, they blew a lead, or not a lead, but they give up a late goal to drop all 3 points. And yeah, this Dynamo team, I just don't see how this team can make the playoffs if they just continue to do this, which is blowing either leads or just blowing games that they probably could have got a point out of, and they didn't. So, you know, Houston is in 17th place. I think this is also one of the lowest that they've been in, but it kind of explained the fact that when you lose 2 straight, when you lose your midweek game and your home game, you lose your home midweek game and then you lose an away game in a game that you probably could have got a draw in that one. That pretty much how it explains it. And in 16th place, this team moved up 2 spots from last week, and that, of course, the Union. So the Union didn't play this weekend, but they did play in that midweek game against Houston, which they won 3-1 in that controversial kind of win. But that certainly helped them in terms of their hopes of making the playoffs, and I believe they're still looking outside in. I think they're 7th right now in the standings. They're still a couple of points behind New England, so certainly they need to continue to get those wins. And, you know, the Unions has been starting to get some win on the road lately. I mean, as much as I've been saying that the Union have been very bad on the road, recently they are getting some resort on the road, and those are big resort too. I mean, against Chicago that they won, and then against Houston, although in a controversial kind of fashion, you know, still getting the win. And now if the Union can be good at home and maybe win 1 or 2 more road games, then yeah, maybe this team does have a chance to sneak into the playoffs. And in 15th place, and this team is in a heave of trouble right now, and that, as I said in the review, I think fans of Sporting KC should be hitting the panic button right now. I mean, this is now 7 or 8 games in a row that Sporting KC has conceded more than 2 goals, and that this team has been winless during that stretch. And for a team that was in first place for majority of the season, and a team that I was putting them in the top 5 of the power rankings consistently, and I think even at one point I put them in first place, they're now down to 15th, and this is the lowest that they have been. And right now, Sporting KC is doing exactly what FC Dallas is doing last season, which is had a good first half of the season and just completely collapse in the second half. And right now, Sporting KC are only 4 points above the red line, and they are dropping fast into the 5th place. And they're now in a a area where they are scrambling to try to get some points and fighting off teams that is below them that really want to get into that playoff spot. And in 14th place, this team is another team that, this season, if they were at least a little bit kind of mediocre on the road, this team would have been in a spot where they had to fight off for those playoff spot, and that of course is RSL, who once again cannot get a result on the road, and this time it's against San Jose, and this is the second time that they cannot get anything and had to drop points against the worst team in the league. And that is a recipe of not making the playoffs. And keep in mind, they also drop points to the second worst team in the league, and that of course is the Rapids. I mean, that is inexcusable. I mean, to drop 4 points against two of the worst team in the league. One of them, you had a game at home, which has been the recipe for success and why RSL is still in this playoff kind of contention. This is not looking good. And I just think that RSL, they need to start figure out their road form. I mean, as good as they are at home, that is not going to simply just carry them over the line. It's very rare you see teams that actually had an incredible home record that just got over the line. I mean, I know people will think, well, the Quakes did it last season. Yeah, we got very lucky. I mean, can you see how close we were from not actually making the playoffs? And we had to rely on other teams just kind of self-destruct themselves and not wanted to make the playoffs. And I'm pretty sure teams around them are not going to do the same thing. And for RSL, they got to get something on the road, at least a win on the road if they want to maybe think about making the playoffs, because all these home wins is good, but if you can't win on the road, then that is not going to cut it for them. And in 13th place, and this team dropped 3 spots from last week, and that of course is Minnesota. And again, this is another team that I've been saying that they need to get something on the road if they make it to the playoffs. And I think the road wins is a bigger emphasis for Minnesota in terms of if they want to make the playoffs than RSL, because Minnesota right now, they have a lot of road games coming up, and I even said that there's a stretch where they're going to have to go on the road 5 straight games, and doing those games, that stretch probably will determine their fate of whether or not if they make the playoffs or not. Because again, it's good that if they are very decent at home and they can win all their home games for the rest of the season, but the problem is that might not be enough for them to get over the line. And with Minnesota losing again on the road to Vancouver, they got to figure stuff out, and that was a game that they could have probably easily get something out of that game, consider the Whitecaps wasn't really that good throughout these last couple of weeks. And in 12th place, this team gains 1 spot from last week, and that of course is New England, who didn't play this week, but they get 1 spot because teams around them either lose or they drop points. And in 10th place, this team moved 3 spots from last week, or not 3 spot, or actually, take that back. This team actually lost 2 spots. Actually, look at 10th place for a second, but Montreal, of course, lose 2 spots because they did lose at home to Atlanta, and I think maybe that's a little bit harsh to move them down because of that. But at the same time, you cannot lose at home, and they kind of lost in a bit of a controversial way, so in some way I probably could have maybe made them drop 1 or 2 spot. Although to be fair, this has been one of the highest spot that Montreal has been. I mean, Montreal this season has been right around this spot for majority of the season, and because of that good run that they had back in June and heading into July, they're now up into 11th, and they are also one of those teams that are fighting for those playoff spot against 6 other MLS team in the Eastern Conference that want that last 2 spot in the playoff race. And in 10th place, and this team might be thinking about playoffs and thinking about doing the same thing that they've been doing for the last 2 years. And that, of course, is the Sounders, who, I'm still kind of debating whether or not if they can do it again. I mean, in some way, I think they could with the way that they've been able to grind Resort out. But in some way, I just think that it's going to eventually catch up to them where they just cannot keep grinding Resort and just go into a game just somehow nicking a goal there and expect them to get to the playoffs. Although one thing I will say is that the Sounders has been very good and that they're only 6 points out of the playoffs, and they can definitely prove me wrong if they can continue to go on this good streak. And if they do continue to go on this good streak, then I really think that they're going to do it again for the third season in a row, and once again proving everybody wrong that this team is not good enough anymore. Although I really think that this is probably the last hurrah for the Sounders. I mean, if you look at their squad, it is aging very badly, and I just think they need to maybe think about either retool or just rebuild, because if they continue to look like this for the next couple of seasons, teams are going to start to figure out the Sounders. And in ninth place, this team moved 7 spots from last week, and this was actually the biggest winner from the power rankings, and that of course is TFC. And again, TFC is another team that is having a resurgence, although we kind of expected that they were going to do that eventually in the second half of the season, and it looked like they finally have done it. They have most of their attacking piece now back in shape, and I expect TFC should start to make a bit of a run and expect them to get themselves close to above the red line. I mean, I think they have like around 10 games left this season and they need 6 points. And if they can win most of those games, then yeah, they are going to get into that 5th and 6th spot. And that certainly would be bad news for all these other teams like Philadelphia, Montreal, and New England, and Chicago, and even the Union as a team that is fighting for those positions. Because if TFC gets into that mix, then those 2 spots that I mentioned that they're fighting for is now down to just 1 spot. And that is down to that 6th spot where it's anybody guess now who is going to actually make it into that position. And in 8th place, this team dropped 1 spot from last week, and that of course is LAFC. And for LAFC, if they would have won that game, I would have probably moved them up. But because they drew that game, and because once again they did not learn their lesson from the last El Tráfico where they blew a 3-0 lead to lose 4-3, yeah, that is exactly why I decided to drop them 1 spot. And because they drew in that game, they lost ground to FC Dallas in terms of that top spot, and that gap between them and FC Dallas is now at 6 points. It is definitely widening up. And in 7th place, and this team moved up 5 spots from last week, and that of course is Columbus, who, speaking of widening the gap, they are widening the gap between themselves and 5th place Montreal, and they are now 8 points clear above the red line. And this was a Columbus team that I said a couple of weeks ago looked like they were in danger of falling out of the playoffs because of how the bad run has been in. But they got a controversial win against Orlando City, and then they got a very massive win against the Red Bulls on the road nevertheless. And yeah, they're now up to 7th place. And in 6th place, speaking of the Red Bulls, that's where they are this weekend in my power rankings. And they lost 2 spots from last week because, well, you lose at home to Columbus. And the Red Bulls this season do not lose at home very often. And because they lose at home, they lost ground to Atlanta in the Supporter Shield Racing. And I think the only thing that they might be happy is that they did not lose any ground to NYCFC in the Supporter Shield Racing as in terms of the 2nd place. Although 2nd place does not win you the Supporter Shield, does it? And speaking of NYCFC, that's where they are in 5th place, who dropped 3 spots from last week. And for NYCFC, That's a bad loss against Seattle. And against a Seattle team that, they have been pretty good, but I didn't think that they would just able to lose to them. And okay, yes, NYCFC did had to travel all the way across the other side of the country, which is actually one thing I forgot to mention in the review, and probably maybe that might be a bit of an excuse for NYCFC in terms of why they weren't performing very well. You got to at least get a draw or get a win in that game if you want to keep pace with Atlanta. And right now, it looks like for the second year in a row, NYCFC is just going to miss out on that Supporters Shield because they're dropping points against teams that they definitely should at least get something out of it. And in fourth place, and this team moved up one spot from last week, and that, of course, is the Galaxy. So I know Galaxy fan will be angry that I did not move them up much higher. Consider they got a big draw against LAFC, and the fact that they beat Orlando 4-3. But the Galaxy, when you're right around this position, it's really hard to move you up very highly. And I'm still kind of questioning, should I move the Galaxy this high in the power rankings, and that they should be ahead of LAFC right now. Even though I know that they've been in a very good run, if you just look at how bad the defense was in that last game against Orlando City, yeah, if they do have that kind of performance again against another team, then they could definitely be falling down the power rankings again. But in third place, this team moved up 2 spots from last week. And that, of course, is FC Dallas, who is not only a team that is pulling away from the Western Conference lead, but they are actually all of a sudden look like potential Supporters Shield kind of threat to Atlanta. And who would have thought that would be the case? Who would have thought that FC Dallas would be the one that could be the Western Conference team that would put a threat to Atlanta in terms of the Supporters Shield racing? I mean, I think they're only like 3 points behind Atlanta in that Supporters Shield race, and I'm pretty sure everybody in the beginning of the year, everybody would have said that the team that's going to get the Supporters Shield is most likely going to be an Eastern Conference team, because the West is still much weaker than the East right now. But it certainly isn't the case anymore. It looks like FC Dallas is really chasing Atlanta down and potentially actually going to get a Supporters Shield, which, I said this season for FC Dallas, they need to really show themselves that last year was just a complete fluke. But I definitely did not expect this kind of resurgence for FC Dallas. And you got to give a lot of credit to Oscar Pereira in terms of how not only he has kept this team under the radar and not a lot of people have been talking about them, but they just continue to perform and just really almost put last year as kind of a thing that never really existed and looked like an FC Dallas team that we've seen in the last couple of the season. And in second place, this team moved up 1 spot, and this team currently still holds the longest unbeaten streak, and that, of course, is Portland. And as long as they continue this unbeaten streak and they don't really lose a game, then they deserve to be recognized in my power rankings and deserve to be in that second spot right now. I mean, notice how I actually have 3 Western Conference teams in my top 5. I mean, that's unheard of in terms of how this season has gone. But if you look at how the Galaxy has been just red hot lately, and how FC Dallas themselves have been just really good and on top of the Western Conference, and Portland currently have the longest unbeaten streak, that just shows you how the tide has started to turn a little bit in terms of how the West and the East are being compared. And maybe people should not be sleeping on the fact that a Western Conference team could potentially win MLS Cup. I mean, I know most people still say an Eastern Conference team will win. Most likely Atlanta is going to win this year. But don't sleep on FC Dallas, Portland, or even LAFC. I mean, those teams could definitely challenge for that MLS Cup. But speaking of Atlanta, they are still the undisputed number 1 team. They've been here for a long time now, and again, for Atlanta, it's going to take a lot for them to get knocked down in that first place. Maybe if they do lose and somehow Portland gets up there, then yeah, maybe Portland could be number one and we might finally see a number one. But for now, I still think Atlanta is going to be in first place. And yeah, that of course is my power rankings for this week. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think of it? Did I rank a couple of teams too high, or did I rank your team a little bit too low? But yeah, let me know in the comments below, and I of course will see you guys next time.